So here I am, this little girl navigating her way, getting a lot of training vocally, understanding the texture of my voice, and also how I heard and visualized my songwriting, as it were. And I guess this was the beginning of me really embracing the fact that I was not a pop artist. I was leaning towards soul because I really was internalizing life experiences and trying really hard to express that. And God being kind, my boyfriend and I, we got married, and life started. And somewhere along the line, there were some offers on the table in terms of record deals and pathways to becoming a recording artist in the States, because we had left England and relocated to the States. And at that time, we're in Atlanta. And then my husband and I started having that conversation about, do you want to be known as a Black African artist or as a Nigerian artist? And the answer was as a Nigerian artist. I was fed up of people making being a Nigerian a bad thing all the time. I wanted to show that there was talent, a wealth of talent in most Nigerians. At the time, I don't think Afro Soul was a thing. I don't think that there were that many, how will I explain it, artists exploring an alternative expression of music, and more so female artists. I knew that there was P Square and there was Two Face and there was Tribesmen, and I started to read up on the artists that were making waves in Nigeria. But I said, maybe there's room for me, maybe there's room for different. Now, the thing with me is that in as much as there's this big dream in my heart, there's always that flicker of self-doubt where you're wondering what or who validates you, what gives you the right to think you can be a star, what gives you the right to think you are deserving of popularity or fame, even acceptance. So even as we started that journey and started to dream it, I was still grappling with, I guess, validation, and feeling like I hadn't earned it. So since I felt, okay, nothing's happening yet, I said, do what you can. I'm a big proponent of, while you're waiting, do the work. So I kept on with my vocal work, kept on songwriting. And I think the first song I wrote and knew I wanted to record was Him. I wrote it for the husband, but I didn't know how it was all going to pan out, but I kept writing. And then I think I wrote Truth. These are all songs that were off the Intuition album. And so we get to Nigeria and I'm thinking, okay, what now? Who do you know? Nobody. My husband, just being the amazing guy that he is, went ahead and booked my first studio session at Syndicate Records and said, I met this guy, Akim Marinho, and I think you guys can do some stuff together. They run a studio with Syndicate Records. It's down, we lived somewhat at Parkview, so it's down the road, And I said, okay. So I got to Syndicate Record and I met the gang, and Icon started to play me stuff, and I thought, I'm home. I found people who get that the sound can be different. Doesn't have to be pop. Doesn't have to be bang bang gigi. It can be different. And they were as excited, if not more, than me to travel that journey. And so the process of recording started. It was tedious because I had a full-time job, a 9 to 5. I am a big proponent of, being a multi-potentialite. And I felt you can't have 3 degrees and throw all of that in the dumpster and say you just want to sing. There has to be more. that you're doing, and obviously you have to put food on the table with your husband and all of that. So I was working a 9 to 5, and so I would go to work during the day, and at night I would be at the studio, and there was a lot of stress, no sleep, but there was a dream, there was vision. And the Bible says something about, say, a man diligent in his ways, and all the great things that will happen for you if you work hard and you're diligent and you keep your dream, your vision in front of you. And I think just having the right kind of people around me at the time, it started to, numb or silence that voice that kept questioning whether or not my dreams were valid, whether or not my talent was worthy. And so the dream just started to take shape. And then one of the most pivotal meetings I had was with Cecil Hammond. Cecil Hammond at the time had been so successful with Rhythm Unplugged and was a family friend. And so we started to talk, and he said, okay. He listened to some of the stuff, and everything just started. And he introduced me to the late OJB and said, Lami, this guy is a legend. So if you can get him to believe in what you're doing and do some songs with you, that's a good shoe in. I remember meeting OJB the first time, and he was so unbelievably warm. And he told me a lot of things. He shared a lot of knowledge and explained to me how there weren't many females in the industry and there was room for what I was doing. And so we wrote this song, I Love You. He had the tune in his head, and he expressed it, and I went away, and then I came back, I wrote, and I said, this is what I have. And a lot of times when you're writing and you're new, you're not yet, you haven't blown, you will wonder if your idea makes sense, like what you've written, if you and the producer will gel. So I was so pleased when I got there, and I'm like, okay, this is what I have. And I wanted a simple song. I wanted a ballad that kind of showed that my voice understood the nuances of traveling through different pitches and different vibes, and so we did the song I Love You. And so that was, that journey was moving. The syndicate journey was moving. I was recording with Icon, and then Cecil Hammond started to introduce me to other producers, and then in walks MI. On one occasion, Cecil said, Lami, you need to start getting to meet other artists, and people have to start knowing your name, so it's not just about singing. And I'm really not a people person per se. I'm not shy, but I'm just not an extrovert. So that now I started, it was like pulling teeth. I had to extrapolate the artist Lami from the person, just the homebody girl. And so he invited me to Rhythm Unplugged in Abuja. And I saw Mohits perform. And that was a time when Don Jazzy was so scary, where he never used to speak to anybody, and had that walking stick and all of that mystery. I heard One Day Cole perform, and people like Banky and LD and MI, and I heard the lyrical nature of MI's sound, and I was so intrigued, I was so impressed, and I said to Cecil, that's someone I think I'd like to work with. And it's in looking back that you start to see that you are indeed a product of other people's faith, of other people's efforts and sacrifices, because there's all these many people who don't know who I am and really don't have much to gain from working with this new girl. But they did. And I'm eternally grateful to all these people that I'm mentioning. So where, then Silverbird was like the spot. Everybody was, you go to Silverbird, you just see celebrities just hanging out, So I'd go there sometimes for meetings with Cecil. And there was this day when Cecil said, come to Silverbird. And I got there and he said, Lami, meet MI meet Lami. Tell him what you're trying to do. And he left us alone. I was so nervous, but I said, well, here we are. I think the first song that MI and I recorded was Truth. Greener days, skies were blue. You were me and I was you. A sweet caress of blended bliss. And I remember, so saying Emma just sounds funny in my mouth because I call him Jude. Anyway, so I remember us in the studio somewhere in, I think it was Bode Thomas. Can't remember. Anyway, we're in a studio in Surulere, paid for and everything. And I was really looking at the time and the money, and Emma was like, no, Lami, you can't force this thing. You have to let the energy just flow. And I know you're thinking about studio time and money and all of that. And, everybody thinks that, or everybody thought then that, this one, she's an Ajabotel, she's so funded. Her papa get money, she know they hustle with us. I was hustling, I was working, everything was tight. I didn't have any Baba Minisale that was funding anything. So I was on edge and I had to balance that anxiety with the need to allow the artistic process flow. And Emma was a big part of helping me adjust to that. We started recording, like I said, balancing between Syndicate Records, doing some work with OJB, and then doing some work with MI. And it was supposed to be 2 songs, but as we started to go, I started to work on Kaleidoscope, and MI wrote this rap, and I'm like, you have to feature on this. And that's how that started to go. We would be vibing, and I'm like, you know what, you sound good on this track, let's just do it like this. And that's how I think I just somehow roped him into being a big portion of my work. Then MI lived with Jeannie. I know there's shame for you. That's for you new cats that don't know some. They're calling them new cats now. So MI lived with Ginny, and so I would go to the mainland sometimes, and MI had his own in-house. They had their own studio. So a lot of times I would get there after work and it'd be late, and I'd be anxious about driving back to the island in the middle of the night. But it was what had to be done. And there was all this work that was going into it. And, it was amazing getting to know Jago, getting to know Ice Prince Panchak. And just, at some point we became like a group. We would do so much together and hang out together and go for events together. And those were really dope times. Those are really dope times. And, MI had just, moved to Lagos as well. And he had just, become this really big rap star. So every time we went to places, I remember very vividly, there was this time that we were in traffic on a bridge in Surulere heading to the mainland. And there was the cars beside us, and every single time they would just realize that MI was in the car, people would wind around and say, hey, Mr. Incredible, and I'm like, wow, that's major. And he liked it. MI is a people person, very level-headed, very humble. And I started to learn how to relate with fans, just observing his own interpretation of that interaction between your listeners and realizing that if you don't have listeners, if you don't have people who support your journey, doesn't matter how talented you are, you're really nothing. So there are three things happening. There's Syndicate Records, there's work with OJB, and there's work happening with MI. Syndicate Records is doing stuff like Rectangular and other things, and basically handling the overview of the body of work that we were putting together. And then OJB is working on tracks like Him, I Love You, and other ones, and we're not sure which one's going to make it to the album, as I'm sure you understand that process. And then Emma and I start to work on Kaleidoscope Truth. I'm sure there's like one or two I'm forgetting in this moment. Ooh. And that's with a full-time job and a family. And like I said, Cecil Hammond was such a great guy in positioning me, situating me, doing a lot of networking on my behalf, and kind of shepherding my journey. And what I didn't realize at that time was this was stuff that people would pay billions for, that I was just getting for free because he believed in what I was doing. Thank you, Cecil. Now, what's interesting, me saying all of this, is you would think that I would know that I was working towards an album. But in my very naive head, I was just recording to see what was going to happen. And maybe I took that perspective so that maybe I was protecting myself from saying, oh, I'm working on an album, and then that wouldn't work out. Very emotional roller coaster. Anyway, remember I said that if my husband didn't push, and if he didn't believe, and if he didn't keep seeing more in me, I would so not even be Lami Phillips. And he comes and says, let's have an album listening. I'm like, but I don't know people. We don't have money. We don't have backing. How are we going to do this? And I told Cecil, I said, let's do an album listening. So there was this restaurant called Red. It was new. It was the new vibe. You know, anybody wanted to eat there and kind of be seen there. And you know, I had Ojukokoro, Long Truth. So I said, so can we do the album listening here? And Cecil said, okay, let's talk to them. So they gave us this space, and between my husband and Cecil, they invited so many people. And you know, we got a live band, and it was from that moment that I was really insistent on always performing with a band, because I didn't know any other way. And we had the album listening, and you know, there was press, and I'm like, this thing might work. You might actually have something worthy of people talking about it and wanting to be part of that process. Maybe it will work. Maybe there's something